I'm Kelsey Litchfield, and this is the Field Advisor Podcast, where I talk with local experts to unpack the latest agronomy information and research, giving you the knowledge to make informed decisions out in the field. Welcome back, everyone, to the Field Advisor Podcast here at the Farm Progress Show in Decatur, Illinois. I'm Kelsey Litchfield. I'm joined by three individuals who's going to talk pesticide regulation today. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. Dr. Aaron Hager, University of Illinois. Dr. Corey Lacey. Corey, I don't think I introduce you as a doctor very often.
It's okay. I'm not really qualified.
Environmental Policy Manager with Illinois Soybean Association. Then Kevin Johnson, KJ, with the Illinois Fertilizer and Chemical Association. Corey, I'll go to you. You said we need to talk pesticide regulation. There's probably a lot of things underneath that umbrella to talk about.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of stuff we can kick off with. I think maybe the biggest conversation in the room right now for growers is Dicamba. And so maybe, KJ, do you want to give us a little bit of background on what's going on with Dicamba from ag retail?
So this here in the last month, U.S. EPA came out and said that they are going to look at or asking for comments from farmers, growers, and retailers on do we bring back post-application Dicamba over the top of soybeans across the United States, but also in cotton. They are looking for comments. I know they extended comments, I think, back to next Friday. I think that is the 5th. I think they're trying to look for comments here at the Farm Progress Show, what that looks like going forward. It's a little different than what they've put out in the past. There's kind of different temperatures when to spray, but it is a back over-the-top application. There is no cutoff date through the federal label, but we can get more details what we think what that might look like. But I think they're open up for comments. My understanding from U.S. EPA is that they would like to have something out by October 1. And that's good because I do think EPA is listening to us, what we've said in the past, because most growers are making decisions. I can tell you on our farming operations, we're already starting to look at seed decisions going into next year by October. So I think, when we've usually had this, it's been in the spring. And I can tell you my check has probably already cleared the retailer of what I've already bought my seed from, fertilizer decision. So I give them credit, but I think there's going to be a major discussion. What does that look like here on the federal label? Do they do a new label, but also if they do, what happens at the state of Illinois level, too?
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, what are some of the comments you're hearing at Farm Progress Show about it?
I think it's all over the board. I mean, it hasn't changed from back when this started in 2017. There's some people that just would love every bit of it, and then there's people that are like, hey, we'd like to see and not have a post label. So I think it's all throughout the board of where people are at. I think it just where to depend you're at, and then, again, what Jet NX are you buying? Are you more an extend soybean traits? Are you on the list program? Where you're at? So I think it's all over the board.
What about you, Dr. Hager? What are you hearing from individuals about it, real quick?
Really, it's like KJ said. You have some who really believe that that's a technology that would be beneficial in their farming operation in their soybean growing year, and of course there are others who have made other systems and other technologies work just fine. Actually, I've talked to several farmers here at the show who are pretty much non-GMO beans, and they've learned to adapt those systems. They've addressed the water hemp issues, straight on, not just relying on a chemical solution for it, but a lot of them are actually actively walking, the fields trying to reduce that seed load, which is really ultimately the key of managing water hemp, regardless of if that's in a non-GMO system, if it's in a dicamba system or enlist system.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Corey, what about you? All over the board?
All over the board for sure. I mean, Illinois soybeans definitely in a position of, we want to keep all the tools in the toolbox for our growers. And I think, Kelsey, you and I have actually talked about this in the past, that there are weed resistance out there that Dicamba can help guys with, right? But also, let's use all our products in the correct manner. And, in the best way to maximize weed control, I think, is what people have to be thinking about. And maybe minimize any resistance buildup and things like that over time. If you overuse any product, it's going to go away quickly. So I think that's something people have to keep in mind. I mean, I know, Aaron, you and I have kind of talked about that. And
Yeah,
I don't know what the timeline on that kind of thing is, but
well, we need to remember too that while the use pattern in soybean may be somewhat new and novel, the use of dicamba in the state of Illinois is not. We've had that product available for use since the late 1960s, so it's not something that we're actually starting from ground zero, so to speak, in terms of the selection intensity for the evolution of resistance. We actually documented dicamba resistance in Illinois water hemp populations actually several years ago. So it's not anything, again, that we're starting from scratch. It has to be something, again, if we need this tool, if we need this technology because of issues around resistance, if we're only going to rely on that and nothing else, then it's probably going to be the livelihood or the effective lifespan of that technology is going to be greatly reduced. So not only use the technology, but as we've really been trying to emphasize now for decades, is that anything that survives that application, anything that produces seed at the end of the growing season, that's undergone another cycle of selection. And even though a few individual female amaranth plants are not going to slow you down at harvest time, but they could actually contain the next combination of genes or alleles that bring in the next instance of resistance. So again, I can remember a time back in the probably early 2000s where even fellow faculty members of mine would look at me and say, we don't need you anymore. The Roundup Ready technology is really all we're going to need for weeds. We're never going to need anybody who's looking at all these other technologies or all these other weed control or weed management options and tools that farmers could look at. And it's simply an evolutionary process.
Yeah.
And, we don't make a lot of predictions about the future, but we do have a pretty good idea, if we don't steward this technology, if we don't steward any future technology, right off the bat, then it's something that we're going to compromise that as we move forward.
Kelsey, I'll add this. Even if the U.S. EPA level, they do approve something, you have the Illinois Department of Ag that will put something out. And I'm just talking with them initially. Right now on the books, they have rules that say if there's a dicamba label post that they are probably going to go back to a June 20th cutoff date, a forecasted high of 85. So not when you spray at 72, but if it's forecast to be 86 later that day, it's a do not spray. And then there's a couple other things, but those are the two biggest things. If I'm looking at my hourglass, if there's something, I think the department will put that back out there. Could they change that? Yes, but I will tell you, to rechange rules, to redraw rules, that will take 6 to 9 months. And I think the department, like I said earlier, EPA did listen and say, let's get out this earlier. I don't know if the department really wants to take 6 to 9 months to redo it. So even if there's a federal label, I do think the department's going to come back probably most likely with those rules that are already in the books with the June 20th and then forecasted high of 85 cutoff date.
So I guess we're just in a waiting pattern right now with it.
KJ, I got a question for you actually. The forecasted high, so in the EPA memo about this, they talked about a forecasted temperature over a 48-hour period. Does IDOA's, is that 85 degrees, is that a forecast over a 48-hour period too? Or
no,
is
it's
that
24 hours. It is 20. So what we tell people is go to weather.com or weather.gov. It'll give you a forecast high. That's what most people are going off of. But that's also going off the wind also. Then you can, I tell our, if we were going to spray it at our farm, I would say, guys, take a screenshot of that day when you're going to spray. And you get, if you're going to be at Raintool, Illinois, or Gifford, Illinois, or St. Joseph, Illinois, take a screenshot of that weather that day so you have something documenting to IDOA that here's when it was sprayed, or what that forecast would look like.
And I think that's a good point. It does have to be a NOAA weather, so it does have to be from weather.gov. It can't be a local weather station on your field or anything like that. It has to be the official Gov.
Yep.
Okay, anything else on dicamba? I know you didn't want to talk about it the whole time. There's plenty of other things to talk about.
We mentioned earlier Roundup and glyphosate. We kind of hinted at resistance there. I mean, I think another conversation that has to be had is around bans and those kind of language in Springfield. I know, Aaron, you had some interesting conversations around glyphosate bans last year with some of the legislators. I mean, what are your thoughts there? How did those conversations go from your opinion?
The big challenge about this is that so much of what is proposed in from my perspective on bans for example, for glyphosate or for 2,4-ester, there's not always a lot of good science that is backing these bills, these proposed pieces of legislation to ban these products. I mean, glyphosate is an active ingredient that's been commercially available since the 1970s. And, you know, in the body of the scientific literature that has looked at things like the epidemiology or the potential for this to cause cancer, the overwhelming science says that it doesn't. Now, that being said, you could always go into the literature and find a study or two, or maybe perhaps more, that would really justify your point or the provision of your bill that you are sponsoring. But when the overwhelming majority of the science points in one direction, it's really, in my opinion, it's not in the public's best interest to try to take that and point it in a different direction. That certainly the vast minority of science, and some of this is probably not even very credible science, to be honest with you, that just maintains whatever that point is that you're trying to make on this. So, you know, there's federal agencies not only here in the United States but around the world who have reached a similar conclusion that a product like glyphosate is not likely to cause cancer. Now, you always run into the individuals who, for whatever the reason is, you know, do not obey the labels. They do not, and they're very haphazard in how they handle a compound. And that's not to say that glyphosate is completely without risk, because everything has a risk associated to it, right? All three of us took a risk this morning driving here, right? Driving carries a risk associated with that. But it's a risk that can be managed. But we have to respect the technology. We have to respect the fact that labels are written in such a way to try to, you know, protect the handler, protect the user, protect anybody in the general area where these products are being applied.
I think one thing people got to know, here in the last year, the EU reapproved Roundup. And I think they, you know, you could argue people that they have a more restricted than the USA, and if they're reapproving Roundup, I think that says something. The other thing I want to add to this conversation is, I think most farmers do not realize this, and Corey and Aaron have heard me say this a million times. We have a thing in Illinois called pesticide preemption in the state of Illinois, and that is the most important thing farmers in the state of Illinois have that they don't even know about. And that means the Department of Ag in the state of Illinois regulates all pesticide. A county or a city or a village or a, you know, a subdivision can't ban Roundup or other products. It has to go through the Department of Illinois. Now, they can run legislation that you can pass that way, but it is approved by the Illinois Department of Ag, and that is one of the factors, and they look based on the science, but they're also based on what's based off of EPA science. So I put that out there.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think it's important. You know, you said this about EU, but US EPA calls Roundup, or calls glyphosate, I guess I should say, an unlikely carcinogen. I can't remember the exact language, but in US EPA not US EPA, EU did just allow it. I mean, there's a lot of science that says that when it's used correctly, like with anything, I think to your point, Aaron, it's okay and we can do it. And I think that a lot of farmers understand the label and they're following the label, you know, especially with something like glyphosate.
Absolutely.
But I think on that topic of like using it correctly, KJ, I know one of the big things you pushed last year was updating training for applicators. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Good update there.
So this is a thing that Illinois Fertilizer Chemical has been pushing for many years, but it wasn't the right timing. But as most guys know, most applicators, farmers and custom applicators, you take a test that is approved by the Illinois EPA, US EPA and the Department of Ag, and once you get past that, or you pass that test, you take a test every 3 years to keep up your license. What we are asking, and a lot of states around us have it, is that you still got to take that test to show core competency the first time. But after that, you can take continuous education classes to keep up your license. And what we're looking at is probably 5 hours a year. If you do that, approved classes to the Department of Ag, once you do that, you will be able to keep your license up. Now, if you want to take your test every 3 years like you're doing already, that's not going to change one iota. But I will tell you, I might learn differently than Corey, than to Aaron, to Kelsey. There's some guys that are better test takers, that are better guys that they take some of those classes. So we're giving guys options. I think it's a great thing for the industry because in some ways this is a better way to get better information out. I think, if I was putting it together and we're talking to the department right now, probably a couple hours of that is general studies that we need to hit every year, just the basics. But maybe those other 3 hours are what are the issues today? If Dicamba comes back, hey, the Dicamba training is probably one of those hours. If we need to hit something on more about adjuvants, maybe we'll hit that. Maybe one of it's about the herbicide strategy, Endangered Species Act. Maybe that's an hour. But we can change that every year to see what is the real focus, what we need to go into the current year. So I think those once we get this off the ground, we'll probably have these conversations about this time of year, building out classes for that summer. I will tell people two things we get asked about a lot on this. This probably will not be brought to us till probably the summer or fall of 27 because we need to build this out. We're going to have to go through rules through the Illinois Department of Ag, but also just give us time on this. I've also got questions. Are they going to be online? There will probably be some kind of online training, but I will tell you, if you guys took your testing during COVID, all those testing was proctored. And if there's probably an online course, it's going to be proctored also, just to get it through approval through US EPA. But we're very excited. The governor signed that piece of legislation a couple weeks ago, so it is on the move, and we're going to start working with rules with the department, Illinois Soy, and the commodity groups to bring the best program to Illinois.
That's great.
Yeah,
Great victory.
I think we're really excited about this because, I mean, KJ, you kind of touched on it, but, the ability to make that training flexible year to year and insert new thoughts. One thing that, the three of us have talked about a lot is the drift herbicide report that came out last year from – who was that from, Aaron? The drift herbicide?
There's a couple of scientists from the Illinois Natural History Survey that did that survey back in, I believe it was the 2023 growing season.
That's right. And things like that probably need to be shared with our applicators in the state. And so they're just aware of, what are the challenges and how things are coming up. And so that flexibility is, I think, a huge piece of this. And also, the concept of continuing education credits, that's something we're really familiar with in the agriculture world.
Yeah.
We know how to do that well. And my understanding is every other state around us has something similar for their pesticide, or almost every state.
Every state. I think the only one that doesn't touch us is Wisconsin. But every other state's got some kind of program. But when we took this to the Department of Ag, I'm like, I'm not trying to do a bare bones program. I want to make it as strong as possible. We want to show that we can do this right. So I think that's why we came up with the 5 hours. That is in the legislation, but I think the broader thing, we can bring better education to applicators.
Mm-hmm. Let's go back to the federal side. Let's talk MAHA. As I said, we need a new acronym. Make America Healthy Again. That report was supposed to come out, 2 weeks ago, and we're still waiting on it.
Yeah, that's a fair point. So we saw the first report about a month ago. Was it 2 months ago now, the first report? And, a lot of stuff in there that concerned farmers, especially soybean farmers, seed oils, pesticide concerns, glyphosate and atrazine were called out specifically in it. We saw right before it was scheduled to kind of come out a leak of the document. I like to tell people there's a lot of conversation about the draft. I like to point out to people that what you saw is a draft. If you've read that, you don't know what's actually going to be in the final report.
Yep.
I was in some calls last week on the federal level. I think we're not going to see anything till sometime in September at this point. But what we did see in the draft was some language and that it backed off some of the pesticide concerns, which I think we're pretty happy about. But it just highlights again that the need for education, the need for folks like Aaron to get in front of people that maybe aren't farmers some of the time and say, hey, this is the value that it brings to farmers. And here's all the safety things farmers are already doing or farmers and applicators are already doing when it comes to using these products. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the MAHA report is definitely something that is a bigger conversation and it's kind of ongoing. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that or.
I'm very concerned about it. When we're talking federal issues, that's the first thing that comes up. If that's one of the things that is going to keep me up at night, is definitely that one. The first report did not call out any pesticides by name, but the draft that they was talking about, that it was going to call out stuff by name. My worry is what you're seeing is there's a proposal out there, but it's going to states. it's leaking down the states. We know Texas passed something. Again, they were going to call it some pesticides, but they did not at the end of the day. I know Louisiana passed some legislation, and I think Pennsylvania and Maine also had some of this stuff. So it's out there. Does it start going to some of these states? And you're seeing in a lot of red states. Illinois is definitely a shade of blue. Does it come here? We don't know. But it's definitely leaking down to the state level.
Well, and that's actually a good call out on the MAHA movement in general. It's kind of interesting. It's one of those situations where politics is doing a full circle, and so all of a sudden you get some weird bedfellows. You get
Absolutely.
some very extreme Republicans and some very extreme Democrats right together aligned. And, when that's aligned around some information that maybe isn't 100% perfect, that's a scary situation that I think we have to talk about.
Yep.
For sure. Also, what I like to remind people when I'm talking about MAHA is a movement around a lot of concepts.
Oh, yeah.
Vaccinations, the executive
very broad.
order. Yeah, it's huge. And so, even if we push back on some areas, it's going to shift to other things. And so it's a very organic kind of situation. And I think we just have to be flexible. But at the end of the day, I think we just have to tell our story and how we're using our products. And that's all you can do.
I'm curious, Dr. Hager, what your thoughts are on the MAHA report. Is that something you're following very closely, or you're just waiting to see what happens?
It's something that we read the draft document, of course, when it was first issued, and highlighting glyphosate and atrazine. But again, it goes back to really where is the weight of the science at, and the weight of the science does not support canceling these products because of the perception that there's adverse health consequences when these products are used according to the label guidelines. So it's something that I think if we rely on the science, we're fine.
Yeah.
But if we rely on panic and misperception of some of the tools and technologies that we've literally been using for 60, 70, 80 years, successfully using in this country, to raise a very safe, crop food source for not only folks here in the U.S. but around the world. That's what I think that's going to be a challenge. I really think in this era where a lot of the general public may not be as acute on science as what they used to be. And science is an ever-evolving thing, and we certainly encourage people, if they have questions, to to take a fresh look at these things. But when even many of the new studies looking at these, have reached a very similar conclusion to some of the studies that were done decades ago. And I think that's really, at the end of the day, for the benefit of everyone, where we need to really hang our hat is based on the science and not on the knee-jerk reactions.
Where are they getting some of these not so credible science facts? Is it just talking to the wrong people? Like you said, you want people like Dr. Hager to communicate with them. Is that happening to some degree, or just need to push more?
Well, I'm sorry. Part of the recent experience that we've had around some of the, the detections of pesticides, in trees and things that we talked about that large survey, what follows after the fact that, okay, we sent off a leaf sample, we detected, pesticide X, Y, or Z in here. It's not always that we detect these things, but the more important question to ask is, what is the concentration at which we're detecting these? A lot of these lab analyses are now coming back at parts per billion. And I think one thing that not a lot of folks can maybe easily wrap their head around is that if you think about 1 part per billion, what is that? What is the magnitude of 1 part per billion? It's hard to understand that, but if you tell somebody, you know what 1 part per billion is, that's 1 second in 32 years. Yeah. That's a part per billion. I think when you put some scale to what these measurements are, it really highlights the fact that it's not just that we're finding something here, but the more important question is, what is the concentration of it? Because at certain concentrations, pesticides or virtually any other thing in the environment could either be toxic or essentially harmless. But it's really the concentration of it that's really the important factor. So, when we hear a lot of people saying, well, if we're finding these things detected in tree leaves, and that must mean we're breathing all these vapors in, this, that, and the other. But again, the important question is, what is that concentration? Because these are things that have been evaluated by the regulatory agencies in this country for decades. And they have established standards below which they don't feel like there's any adverse health consequences that take place. So I guess, we don't have to have zero in everything.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult to ever get anything to a zero because, when I started here 32 years ago, we were at that time measuring things in parts per million. That's a totally different number than a part per billion, which we can measure now. And obviously, with analytical technology improvements over time, we're getting these concentration detections at even lower concentrations that now some of the equipment can actually find and detect.
Corey, you were going to mention something earlier.
Well, first I'll jump in on this concentration. One thing I like to tell people all the time is, something like water, we all drink water, but at the right concentration, water's deadly, right? So, and I'm not advocating for, anything there, but I'm just, the details matter is the kind of the point I was making. And then to your question about where they're getting some of the science, some of the most shocking stuff about the initial report that I read was there is completely false citations that happened in those documents, where they would cite a real researcher, kind of a topic that sounds like something they would write, but then when you talk to the researcher, they're like, that's not anything I ever published. There's no tracing to it. And there's a lot of evidence that a lot of that was written by AI, and I think that that's kind of a crazy thought, right? So you asked where are they getting this information? Well, I kind of wonder if they're getting some information from, I don't want to name anything specific, but from an AI bot. And, I'm a big proponent of AI use, but you got to use it as an expert. You got to use it in a way, and you got to check what's coming through that.
Verify,
And the fact that they're not verifying something of this magnitude, I think that just right there kind of questions, are they really focused on the science and the details? And if they're not, we need to help them get there,
Go back to the old Reagan quote, trust but verify.
Yep.
Definitely. Okay, so talked Dicamba, MAHA, anything else under the pesticide regulation subject that you want to bring up?
I think we're good. I think we'll keep you guys informed, and I know Corey will too. Just going into the spring, I know that's a ways off, but if there's anything legislatively, we'll watch out for it. And we're definitely going to see something with MAHA, and then with the Dicamba, there's going to – I think something will be out by EPA by the 1st of October at the end of the day.
I assume that's where they're going to be. And I think I would say that, one of the things people need to be watching is, KJ and I talk about policy a lot, but Aaron in Illinois Extension are going to come out and give us guidelines. If Dicamba does come back, we need some really good guidelines on when's the appropriate time to use it. What are some alternatives, and what are some thoughts, how people should be thinking about that. And I think it's really U of I's place and position to do that. And we're lucky to have someone like Aaron over there to help kind of give that guidance to Illinois.
Definitely. I'll put in one more question. Harvest is nearly here. By the time this podcast is published, hopefully soon, harvest will begin for some. Anything under pesticides or weed management specifically you want farmers to be watching for this coming fall? And Dr. Hager, I'll start with you.
Yeah, we always say the same thing about this time of year. The harvest operation, we liken that to your last scouting pass for your weed control, because really that's your last time to get a good idea, okay, what worked this year, or maybe what didn't work. Now, it's always good when things work for you and you've got very effective weed control, and certainly you've got the records of, okay, here's what we used this year, here was our pre-program, here was our post-program, the timing, et cetera, But perhaps even more critical, if you run into the field scenarios, the unfortunate scenarios where things didn't turn out very well, why didn't they turn out well? What was the cause of that, or potential causes for that? And can we make some modifications, going into this fall as we make some purchasing decisions for weed management going into the 2026 season? Maybe it is a change of trait technology that we need to consider. Maybe it is a different type of a pre-emergence herbicide, or trying to be more timely with our post-application. Maybe we ought to consider adding that layered residual in with our post-application if we haven't done that previously, but yet we've got a lot of late-season weed escapes this year. So that's really the last opportunity that we would have to give a good evaluation on everything that we invested this year in terms of trying to control the weeds. Can we do something differently? Do we need to do something differently to try to ensure that investment in 2026 is going to return the best, return on every dollar that we can get?
Definitely.
I think Aaron hit it on the head. The only thing I will add, and this is not as much to pesticides, but I was talking to Corey about this before we talked, fertilizer. There will be some sticker shock out on some fertilizer prices. The biggest thing I would tell people going into fall, have good conversations with your retailer supplier on fertilizer, especially on that phosphate. Phosphate number, there will be sticker shock on. I think you need to talk to your retailer. What are you planning to do this fall? I think there will be retailers that are with the price of what it is. Maybe we're not going to fully stock everything, so have a conversation with your retailer. If you're really thinking you're going to put something on, have a conversation with them. I mean, this is all, everything's about conversation. When we talk Dicamba, having a conversation with your neighbor. But going back to the fertilizer stuff, have a conversation what you're looking like, because I do think there could be some guys pushed to the spring. But if you're looking for it, just that, it might not just be that one call like, hey, I need so many tons today. Can you get it on? Especially with the prices, I think guys need to have a more of a head time of what that looks like.
I would double down on both those points. I think you guys got the experts here that are telling you what to do, and I think that's where it is. I mean, we were talking about this earlier. I would expand it beyond fertilizer to all crop inputs. I mean, we see crop input prices going up and commodity prices fluctuating, maybe in the downward trend a lot of times. And so I think, the cost of farming is something that we have to be careful about, and it's going to take a lot of conversations with our ag partners across the board and lining up stuff. I know one of the points you made to me earlier, KJ, was just guys aren't going to keep stuff in stock, so you might be used to being able to just call over and get something picked up, and they're not going to have it there. And so, yeah.
There's good lead time. I tell people lead time. Because what I've heard just around this conversation this week is, well, I don't like the price, don't love the price, I might kick to spring. And that just pushes stuff back. And again, retailers, and I think retailers, I'm not just going to talk about farmers. Farmers should be calling retailers, their customers, say, what are you thinking? What is your game plan? Here's what prices are. I know you might not like it, but what is your plan? Are you thinking spring? Are you just willing to pull back? Hey, we might cut back to 75% of what our 5-year average is, or hey, we're just going to hold off and just kick to spring. So again, everything's about conversations.
Communication is key. Well, KJ, Corey, Aaron, thank you so much for coming on the Field Advisor podcast today. We'll talk to you again very soon.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Everybody have a safe fall.
Yes, definitely. Thanks for listening to the Field Advisor podcast. Unbiased, independent agronomy information to keep your farm moving forward. I'm Kelsey Litchfield, your voice from the field. This podcast is funded by the Illinois Soybean Association Checkoff Program. Stay connected with Field Advisor on social media. Follow, like, and share to keep the conversation going. And don't forget to subscribe to the Field Advisor podcast on your favorite podcast platform.